Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we'll talk about what happened to the Wolves against the Thunder on Saturday night. Another disappointing offensive performance and yet another dominant defensive performance. We'll talk about both ends of the floor on Saturday. We'll also look ahead to Wolves Hornets tonight, Monday night from Target Center. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. Today on the show, it's a bit of a hybrid post-game pod and a preview. The Wolves, of course, did not play Sunday, so I want to talk a little bit about Saturday's game against the Thunder. You know, it was such an important opponent, a entertaining game. So I want to break that down a little, kind of a mini post-game pod, and we'll also piggyback that with a look ahead to the Hornets game tonight. We haven't seen Charlotte for, 6 weeks or so, beginning of December. So that's what we'll do here on the show today. We'll peek ahead at the week as well, and that's all upcoming. A big thank you here, first of all, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And of course, you can download that app on either one of those services, Roku or Amazon Fire TV. It's more great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's absolutely free. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, so Saturday, it was a showdown with the Thunder. The Wolves came in on a 4-game winning streak, I believe, before Saturday's game, and had split the season series to that point with OKC, winning at home in a close game, several weeks ago, a couple months ago. I guess it was like end of November, so nearly 2 months ago, and then losing rather handily in an offensive battle in OKC just after Christmas. This was the opposite of that. This was a defensive, I'll call it a defensive slugfest. I mean, each of these teams are extremely good defensively, right? The Wolves are by far the league's best team defensively. The Thunder are a top 10 defense. But the difference here in this particular matchup is that the Thunder are also a top 5 offense. And so there's an argument to be made, and OKC's got a better point differential, better net rating coming into this game. So while the Wolves were 2 games ahead of the Thunder in the standings, you could argue OKC's been better to this point in the season with a straight face easily. Also, SGA is the best player on the floor in a matchup between these two teams. Now, just kind of looking at this, kind of the macro view of this would be Minnesota's roster is certainly deeper, and you could say, players 2 through 4 on the Wolves are probably better than players 2 through 4 on OKC, although both Chet Hungryroot and Jalen Williams are both fantastic. Each team is very, very good. So all that to say, these teams it's so funny to compare these teams because they both are similar, but in very different ways. If that doesn't really make sense. The result is basically the same, right? They're both really strong defensive teams. The Thunder have a much more efficient offense than Minnesota. But of course, the ceiling of Minnesota's offense is also otherworldly because of the talents, specifically of Ant and Cap, but also in theory, the way these pieces all work together, the Wolves offense has no excuse to be as bad as it has been. But they arrive at kind of being a really good defense in very different ways. I mean, OKC turns teams over more than any other defense in the league. They're number 1 in defensive turnover rate, which of course is a disastrous matchup against Minnesota, who has now after this game against OKC, the worst turnover rate of any offense in the league. So it's literally the league's best defense in terms of turnover rate. OKC turns over opponents according to Basketball Reference. And I guess I should have pulled the clean in the glass numbers because those take out garbage time. But according to Basketball Reference, OKC has a 13.6% turnover rate now. This is post Saturday's game, which is number 1 in the league, although I think it was 1 before that game. The Wolves had been 29th for a long time in terms of offensive turnover rate, and now they're 30th. They turn the ball over 14% of the time on offense, which is crazy for a team that has the best record in the conference. And also maddening when you look at the rest of the offensive numbers, as we've talked about much on the show. The Wolves are, top 10 in effective field goal percentage as an offense. They're top 10 in offensive free throw rate. They're third in three-point percentage. They just don't shoot enough threes and they turn it over too much. That's been the story of the entire season. But it's a terrible matchup against OKC because they turn teams over more than any other defense. They also are a horrendous defensive rebounding team. It's actually shades of the Wolves defense. They don't do it in the exact same way. They don't blitz pick and rolls in the same way that the Wolves did 2 years ago. But the Wolves team, pre-Rudy Gobert, that lost in the first round to Memphis 2 years ago, was really, really good at turning opposing offenses over and terrible on the glass, and they committed a ton of fouls. That's almost the identical profile to this year's Thunder team when you look at defensive four factors. The one advantage that they have over that Wolves team is they're a little bit better in terms of interior defense. They have Chet Holmgren, and he blocks a lot of shots, so that helps. They're actually number one in blocked shots per game, which is not the cleanest way to measure rim protection, but just looking at the numbers on Basketball Reference, they're number one in block shots per game. They're third in opponent effective field goal percentage, which means that they're the seventh best defense in the league, despite their warts, despite the issues fouling, and despite the defensive rebounding issues. It's so similar to the Wolves from 2 years ago. Now, this year, the Wolves have the league's best defense because they're just kind of good across the board defensively, right? They're top 10 still in opponent free throw rate, which is impressive because it feels like at times they really struggle with that. They're by far number one in opponent effective field goal percentage. They're up to second in defensive rebound rate, which, they dominate the Thunder in the glass every time they play. We'll talk about that. So that helps. And they're kind of middle of the pack in terms of forcing turnovers. So, yeah, the Wolves still have the league's best defense, and they turned in a great performance against OKC, and that's what makes this game so much more maddening. Is OKC shot less than 40% from the field. Another sub 40% shooting performance by an opponent against this Timberwolves defense. OKC was 39.5% from the field. They were 33.3% from three. They made only 8 3-pointers in this game. Minnesota made 14. So Minnesota had an 18-point advantage outside the arc, and they still managed to lose this game by 5. Now, free throws are part of it. We'll talk a little bit about that. But the Wolves' defensive performance was fantastic. They fouled a little bit too much. But otherwise, they came into it with a plan of like, hey, let's try and make these other guys beat us. And remember that game they lost to the Thunder before? Giddey hit a bunch of threes. Like, that's not going to happen all the time. Sure enough, Josh Giddey was 0 of 4 outside the arc in this game. Other role players were not effective either. Kenrich Williams only played 10 minutes. He was 0 of 2 outside the arc. And Lou Dort was 3 of 7, which is fine. But, like, again, you want Lou Dort attempting 7 threes per game. Like, you would rather have that than, say, SGA getting to the line again, right? I know Lou Dort's over 40% from 3, but still, you'd rather him, you'd rather his volume of threes be up than Shea's volume of free throw attempts. Now, Shea's going to get to the line regardless. He had, he's averaging 9 free throw attempts per game, and he's 89% from the line. And yes, he got to the line 13 times in this game. All that to say, the Wolves executed their defensive game plan nearly perfectly. They just fouled a little bit too much, and they were still in position to win this game. But it didn't come down to the defense. It came down to their complete inability to string together offensive performances or offensive possessions without committing turnovers. Minnesota had 21 turnovers in this game to OKC's 8. OKC only turned it over 8 times. The Thunder got up 81 shots in this game. The Wolves only attempted 75 shots. Nobody on the Timberwolves attempted more than 13 shots from the field in this game. The Thunder had 2 guys attempt more than 13 shots, Jalen Williams and Gilgeous-Alexander. Minnesota also only had, and Nas was the one, by the way, that attempted 13. None of the Wolves' big 3, if you will, Rudy, Cat, and Ant, none of them attempted more than 10 shots in this game. I mean, both Ant and Towns got to the line a bunch. They each got 10 free throw attempts in this game. But that is a function of OKC doing a really good job defensively themselves. And yeah, they fouled a lot, but they didn't foul as much as Minnesota. And they also did what they do best. They forced turnovers like crazy. It's such a scary matchup for Minnesota for those reasons. I do want to talk about what the Wolves did well, and then also dig a bit more in on the turnover stuff. And I will do studs and duds here quickly before we get to previewing Wolves Hornets. We'll do all of that here next. Today's episode of Lockdown Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at LinkedIn. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the exact same question. What's the one move that I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's an astronomical number. Anytime you're trying to hire, you need to find the most efficient way to go about it, right? The place where the most viable candidates are in the same spot at the same time. It's something I've experienced before trying to hire, and this is the best way to go about it. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, they might not have time or the resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, this process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7. Cover the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. So the overall flow of this game, of course, the Wolves had a rough first quarter. Sloppy offense, tons of OKC points off turnovers. And again, the Wolves' half-court defense was really good in this game. The transition defense was, some of the Wolves' turnovers, they had a fair amount of just dead ball turnovers. They had a couple of travels, a couple of sloppy Euro steps that, I watched back, and I think they were actually travels, although, you don't often see those called. So I think that got a little bit frustrating to the Wolves because Euro steps, I don't know, guys get sloppy with Euro steps all the time. And suddenly in this game, every Euro step was a travel. Even if it was, it's just the principle of the matter, right? There were a couple of questionable, Rudy got an offensive foul on a screen that was also a turnover, and that was a bad call. Like, there's some of those mixed in. But there were also, Ant dribbling the ball off his foot again, a couple of sloppy passes to nowhere. Like, those sorts of possessions add up, and OKC got some transition points off of that. And in general, they just scored a lot of points off Wolves turnovers. Even if they weren't live ball turnovers, those extra possessions that the Thunder got, they scored on those. Jaden McDaniels was great offensively early. The Stars were quiet, and so it was important. Reid was big again in the first half, as he was that Thursday night's game when Nas was huge early in the game when Minnesota's offense was struggling, and Ant was very quiet in the first half in that win over Memphis on Thursday. Similar story there. Also, a side note, something perhaps we'll get back to later, but the Wolves, some of these turnovers, we're getting back to what I think what the Wolves did a little too much of last season, which was trying to force feed the ball to Rudy. Some of these lobs that, like, especially against a team with a guy like Chet Holmgren, and even though they're much smaller than the Wolves, and maybe that was part of the game plan, is like, hey, these guys don't have size, but the Thunder's defense is really good, and they still have length, and they have athleticism, and they have youth, and they have incredible awareness for how young this team is. And there were so many turnovers, and I meant to tally them, I should have, but turnovers on just forced lobs to Rudy. Like, hey, let's get Gobert the ball. It wasn't quite like when D'Lo was trying to force the ball to him last year, which, eventually he just stopped trying, which was a big part of the problem. But the Wolves tried a little bit too hard at times to get the ball into Gobert. And of course, he ends up finishing the game with only 6 shot attempts, 7 points for Rudy in this game. And 5 of those 7 points came at the free throw line. It was just, I thought, an issue. The Wolves did have a 6-point lead midway through the second quarter, but SGA was great at the end of the second quarter when he got back on the floor after a rest. And OKC got in the bonus early in the second quarter. By halftime, Gilgeous-Alexander had 10 free throw attempts in the first half alone. Now, he finished the game with only 13, so, I know Ant complained after the game about not being able to touch SGA. Well, SGA only had 13 more free throw attempts than Ant in this game. The difference is he made his free throw attempts. Gilgeous-Alexander was 12 of 13 from the line. Ant was 6 of 10. I know the last miss was intentional, but so 6 of 9 before that. And again, 10 of SGA's 13 free throw attempts were in the first half of this game. The Wolves played really well in the third quarter, especially defensively. That's when they really kind of ratcheted up the defense. They were up 9 in the fourth quarter with just over 6 minutes to play, but then Ant threw the ball out of bounds, about 6.5 minutes left. After a timeout, the Thunder scored. The Thunder had actually, we talk about the Wolves offense being so stagnant at times and inefficient and turning the ball over a bunch, which the turnovers have been a bigger issue than a lack of ball movement here lately. The Thunder went 3 minutes without a made field goal in the middle of the fourth quarter. And the Wolves were still up by a couple points with just over 2 minutes to play. Then SGA hits a step back three, just over a minute to play. That put the Thunder up for good. That put them up by 2 at the time. And overall, the Wolves only scored 10 points in the final 9 minutes of this game. And again, it's more turnovers than anything else. They missed a couple of open shots. But it was, again, turnovers. Like there was a bad Ant one in the final minute. Ant actually, I think, had 2 in the final couple minutes, which has been a recurring theme. And, that's the one thing you point to with this game. And obviously you also have, I talked about the Thunder, the Wolves forcing guys like Josh Giddey to shoot threes in this game. Sitting here right now, what's Giddey's 3-point percentage? He's 34.5% from three. Like you'd rather have Giddey making threes than Giddey distributing, Giddey running offense and getting SGA looks. You'd rather make Josh Giddey shoot from the perimeter. You'd rather make Jalen Williams, be as inefficient as he was in this game. He's obviously a good 3-point shooter, but he only attempted 2 threes. I mean, Jalen Williams is 6 of 18 shooting. Took him 18 shots to get his 20 points. So, again, the Wolves' plan was good on defense. On the flip side, Mike Conley was 1 of 9 outside the arc, 1 of 11 overall in this game. Never shot a free throw. Probably the worst Conley game of the year. We just haven't seen much of that. He ended up only playing 29 minutes. Jordan McLaughlin had stints in both halves. Was actually quite productive. I thought Jordan McLaughlin was fantastic. And maybe we start to see, I'm not at all advocating like after one game for an even split minutes or anything crazy like that, because Conley's been fantastic this year. I said something on Twitter the other day, like he's basically been the same player as he was in his All-Star season, just lower volume in terms of scoring. But maybe now that we're hitting late January, getting closer to the All-Star break, steal some minutes here and there for Mike, especially with a softer spot in the schedule. Let Conley play fewer minutes, save him for tougher games, for Western Conference matchups like this one against the Thunder. They play OKC again here in a week from today, actually. Save him for the playoffs, etc. Get McLaughlin some run. See if he's a viable option as your backup point guard in the playoffs. Maybe get Shake Milton some run and find out whether or not you need to make a significant move. I know that people are now clamoring like, oh, the Wolves definitely need to make a move. The Wolves are still first in the West halfway through the season. Like, I'm not saying they shouldn't make a move, and we'll talk more about this here in the coming days and weeks. But they've still got a really good roster. Jordan McLaughlin's a legit good player, within his role. And, Shake Milton has been in the past. Like, can you find a way to steal some minutes here against this upcoming schedule of Charlotte and Brooklyn and some of these other teams? Anyway, I digress. But the Conley 3-point shooting is also a weird thing. Like, how many of those, the Wolves ran a play to get him a 3 when they were down 1 late in the game. And he just missed it. It was a well-run play. Ant made a good pass. Conley just missed the shot. It was, that happens. And so, he makes a couple more of those, or they turn it over a couple less times, or Ant makes those free throws, and the Wolves still win this game. So it's not like this thing was, out of reach, and it's not like it was a disaster and the sky is not falling. As I've said before, after losses, like sometimes you lose to good teams. So the turnover stuff is obviously the biggest issue. That's the biggest takeaway, bar none. I'll throw up the stats here real quick. Overall stats from the game, if you're watching on YouTube. As I mentioned, the Wolves, I flipped the 3-point percentage, or excuse me, the field goal percentage on this graphic. So switch those around. The rest of the stats are all correct. OKC shot 39.5% from the field, not Minnesota. Minnesota was 41.3%. So they held OKC below 40%. They held them to 8 made 3-pointers, and they were plus 13 on the glass. Minnesota was. The issues were they allowed 6 more free throws to OKC, and they turned it over 13 more times. So, I mean, you combine the 3-pointers and the free throws, the Wolves were a plus 18 outside the arc. They were a -9 at the line. So combine those. They were a +9 if you combine the actual points derived from the 3-pointers and free throws. But it's the turnovers. And they did a good job on the glass. Like, not like the Thunder. Again, the Wolves dominated where they should have in terms of size. Chet Holmgren was in a little bit of foul trouble. He only had 5 rebounds in this game. In fact, Josh Giddey, he's a good rebounder, certainly, but he had 8 rebounds. Nobody else at the Thunder had more than 5. And Minnesota being plus 13 in that category, you would have thought that this outcome could have looked a little differently. Points off turnovers, as I mentioned, OKC generated 21 turnovers from the Wolves and 28 points off those turnovers and a 15-4 edge and fast break points in this game for OKC. And that's where this game was lost for Minnesota. I want to do studs and duds quick. I want to look at the Hornets matchup that we'll see here on Monday night. And that's how we'll close out the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by our friends over at BetterHelp. Around New Year's, we get obsessed with how to change ourselves instead of just expanding on what we might already be doing, right? Maybe you finally organized a part of your space, your office, your kitchen or whatever, and you want to tackle another. Maybe you're taking supplements, you're trying to eat healthier, be more consistent, whatever your resolution might be. Find your strengths, make sure that they're baby steps, and it's not you're trying to bite off more than you could chew here right away at the start of the year. It's a challenging time of year for sure, because a lot of us have big goals, big dreams. And instead of just, taking those baby steps, you can get out ahead of yourself, trying to do a little bit too much at once. And therapy can certainly help you achieve some of those goals. If you're thinking of starting therapy, consider giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Celebrate the progress that you've already made. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs only have a couple weeks left. We have Championship Sunday next week. We have the big game a couple weeks after that. Now that we're down to just 4 teams left, there's definitely still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet. You can play live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can also make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find popular parlays and so much more. Again, the app is so easy to use. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, studs and duds from this game. Fairly easy to parse this from this one. I mean, for the Wolves overall, the Thunder had SGA with 33, Jalen Williams with a really inefficient 20 in this game. The Timberwolves didn't have anybody score more than 19, and they only had nobody scored more than 19. They had 4 players in double figures. Naz was probably the best player on the floor for the Wolves overall in this game. He had 18 points. He ended up shooting 7 of 13, got a little high volume at the end there as they were searching for some offense, which is fine. I thought he was good. He also had 4 blocks in this game. He was part of the problem turnover-wise. He had 4 miscues in this game. Ant had 5. Nobody else had more than 3. But he wasn't alone in that department, so that alone isn't going to disqualify him from getting a stud in this game. 18 points for Naz, 7 of 13 shooting, so still better than 50% from the field, 4 of 8 outside the arc, 3 rebounds in 26 minutes. You'd like that to be a little higher, but not a massive deal considering the edge the Wolves had in the rebound department in this game. 4 blocks, and again, those 4 turnovers for Naz. He was a plus 17 off the bench for the Wolves. By the way, the bench was really good in this game overall. They all had positive plus-minus marks. We saw Kyle Anderson again play sub 20 minutes in this game. And this is another example of the Wolves bench. It's just so much deeper than OKC's. Cason Wallace had a big day the other day for OKC. He had no points in 13 minutes in this game. Nobody had more than 5 points off their bench. So now this is when that should matter in the regular season and over the course of the regular season versus in the playoffs when rotations are short anyway. But all that to say, the Wolves bench was really good. So Naz is a stud in this game. I'm also going to go Karl-Anthony Towns, and I know he ended up fouling out at the end, and I know he only made 4 shots from the field, and he only made 1 3-pointer, but I thought he was good overall and came alive late in the game when the Wolves needed offense. 3rd quarter, early 4th quarter. Now, of course, he didn't help the offense much at the tail end of the game, but that was because everything was running through Ant. And this is a topic for another day, but the Wolves, I think, need to do a little better job running late game offense through Karl-Anthony Towns and playing Ant off of that instead of running everything through Ant, especially while he's going through these turnover issues. I understand that late in a close game, especially in the playoffs, you might need your best ISO player, one of the best ISO players in the league in Anthony Edwards, to go against a set defense, and that might be your best option, right? It might be. It isn't always, but it might be, depending on the opponent, etc., situation, score, etc. But against its team that's just a really good team defense and also has good individual defenders in the Thunder and not a whole lot of size, And, Chet Holmgren, I guess, only finished with 4 fouls, but like you had him in foul trouble for a little while. Karl-Anthony Towns has to be who you're running your offense through late in the game against an opponent like this. He ended up with 19 points on just 10 shots, 10 of 10 at the free throw line for Cat. By the way, he's like 89.6% or something from the line now. He's nearly back to 50, 40, 90. You round up and he's there. 19 and 11, 2 assists for this game for Cat, 3 turnovers, which compared to Ant and Naz's numbers doesn't look so bad. Really, really good game for Karl-Anthony Towns. Maybe not really, really good. Maybe not 2 reallys. A really good game for Karl-Anthony Towns. I don't have a third stud in this one. I don't. Well, I guess I'll give one. I'll give it to Jordan McLaughlin. He was good. 8 and 3, made his first couple of 3-point attempts, missed one right at the end of the shot clock that he nearly airballed, but 8 points, 3 assists, 2 steals, 3 of 7 shooting, 2 of 3 outside the arc. Was a good Jordan McLaughlin game, and I'm sure he earned himself some minutes here against Charlotte on Monday night. Duds, I'm just going to go Mike Conley. 1 of 11 shooting, 1 of 9 outside the arc, 4 assists, but he had 3 turnovers. Very un-Mike-like in this game. So he gets the only dud in this one. All right, quickly, previewing the Hornets game. I spent a little more time in the OKC game than I meant to, but let's talk about the Hornets game. We have not seen Charlotte since December. Geez, what day was that? I don't know. It was like December, early December. It was like right before the really rough, difficult patch in the schedule started. LaMelo Ball did not play. Now, LaMelo's was out of the lineup for a long stretch of time. I have it right here. December 2nd was when they played Charlotte last. It was right after LaMelo got hurt. He did just play in 4 straight games, but he did not play against the Sixers on Saturday. So he's questionable right now to play the Wolves. Now, that was the second night of a back-to-back. So I would imagine he plays on Monday night. But he's officially day-to-day, according to the Hornets, and they haven't released an injury report yet for Monday. So I would imagine he plays Monday night. He had played in 26 minutes his first game back, then 30, and then 31 each of the next 2 nights. So he'll probably play a little over 30 minutes in this game. He's been really good since he came back. They lost the first 3 games. They got blown out, by the way, at San Antonio, at Miami, at the Pelicans. But we're home for the Spurs on Friday night and beat the Spurs by 4. And this was after a 6-game losing streak from Charlotte. And overall, Charlotte has lost, let me make sure I did this math right, 17 of their last 19 games. No, 18 of their last 19 games, if you include the loss to Philly on Saturday. They've lost 18 of their last 20 games. Now, with the LaMelo Ball back, obviously the offense gets much better for Charlotte, or it should get much better. For the season, though, a team that everyone expected to have a great offense is only 27th in offensive rating, and they're the second worst defense. The defense has been horrendous. It's only outpaced by Indiana, who's just been beyond horrendous defensively. Gordon Hayward's still not going to play. He's been out since right after Christmas. He did play the first time these teams matched up. So, no Gordon Hayward is also significant. He had 17 points and just 11 shots the last time these teams faced off. He might be back in a week, but he's not going to play in this game. So probably will have LaMelo Ball, will not have Gordon Hayward, but otherwise a relatively healthy Charlotte team. Like I said, they're not good on either end of the floor. At the moment, they're just 9 and 31. So they're, only better than Detroit and San Antonio so far this season. They actually have the worst net rating in the entire league so far this season. The key thing against them is they don't do anything well offensively. They're actually, they're dead last in free throw rate on the offensive end. They're 20th in 3-point percentage. So I guess don't let them have too many open threes in this game would probably be the biggest thing. That's the way they're going to beat you. And then obviously they also, their pace isn't fast so far this year, but that's LaMelo Ball's only played in 19 games? Yeah, 19 games. So a big part of that is the lack of LaMelo Ball. If LaMelo Ball's on the floor, they're going to try and play faster. So don't be fooled by the overall pace mark for this season. So they don't get to the line a ton. They don't shoot a ton of threes. They make them at a decent clip. So that's the number one thing to look out for. They're also 20th in offensive rebound rate. So also be careful there. They are middle of the pack in terms of forcing turnovers for the opponent. So, they're not the Thunder there, but they still force turnovers on about 12% of opponent possessions. So the Wolves, number one, above everything else, the Wolves need to take care of the ball, which is, I guess, number one in terms of keys to the game in perpetuity now for this Wolves team, because it's what's holding them back. I mean, they would have beaten the Thunder without turning the ball over 21 times. You take 2 or 3 of those away, and they win that game fairly, maybe not easily, but they win that game. No question. So the Wolves take care of the ball, and they somewhat limit offensive rebound, second chance opportunities, and open threes for Charlotte. They should win this game fairly easily. And then next up for Minnesota, I mean, we talked about this the other day, like this stretch in the schedule is it's favorable for the Wolves. And so they have Monday at home against Charlotte, the last game of this 3-game homestand. Then a 4-game road trip at Washington, at Brooklyn, at San Antonio, at the Thunder. They'll be favored in those first 3. The back-to-back, by the way, is Washington, Brooklyn, Wednesday, Thursday. So not a walk in the park there, second night against Brooklyn. They've got some good players, of course. We'll talk about that later in the week. But then at San Antonio Saturday and back in OKC for the final matchup against the Thunder Monday, which, it's that much more important now because if they lose, the Thunder will have the tiebreaker if they end up with the same record at the end of the regular season. So big to win that game in OKC on Monday night. We'll talk a little bit about that here later in the week as well. All right, that's all we have for today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on the biggest stories. And also a reminder that you can tune into the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.